Now, Ms. Goss-Graves, is there any reason to think that people are transitioning, often completely radically changing their life and their health just to gain a competitive advantage in women's sports?
There's absolutely no evidence of that, and actually putting that notion out there in a formal setting with policymakers sends a really terrible message. If I could just say one thing about what I hope transgender young people who may be watching this hearing know. And that is this sort of legislative bullying that they may experience in their states, or they may have heard in these halls, is not where the majority of the people in this country are. In fact, the vast majority of people see right through it and don't like that bullying.
And I agree with you. You may or may not know this, but there are more Republican and far-right bills moving through legislatures and through different bodies across the country than there are actually trans kids and youth playing in sports across the country. And so the attacks that are happening, we should be ashamed of. And as a reminder, as I conclude, half of trans and non-binary youth struggle with thoughts of suicide every single year, and that's what this hearing should be about versus the attacks on trans athletes. I yield back.
Again, this is a hearing about women, and protecting Title IX. It's not against any group. But with that, I recognize Mr. Langworthy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair McLean, for holding this hearing. And I can't believe that I have to say this here today, but biological males competing in women's sports is fundamentally unfair. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle time and again tell us to follow and trust the science, yet we are here having to have a debate on a subject in which science has proven definitively that males have a physiological advantage over women, including body size, greater muscle mass, increased lung capacity, larger hearts, bone density, and mass, and less body fat. These differences create significant performance gaps between post-pubescent males and females, and these are the facts, and those who claim otherwise are threatening the integrity of Title IX and the ability of women to compete on an equal playing field. The Department of Education's proposed rule conflates sex with gender identity and blocks schools from adopting and enforcing policies that altogether ban transgender students competing on teams consistent with their gender identity. This move sacrifices the integrity of sports, denying the importance of maintaining a level playing field for all athletes. Ms. Perry, you previously wrote that rather than clarifying Title IX's application to sex-based criteria in athletics, that this proposed rule complicates it. Could you elaborate on that?
It makes something that was previously very cut and dry, very simple, and for which there are 5 decades of jurisprudence and congressional history, and suddenly likes to pretend that we don't understand what this definition of sex was. In fact, this particular law that we discussed today was the result of 250 different versions between House and Senate bills and months of negotiation. So to say that somehow sex, when it was adopted, was somehow ambiguous is just patently untrue. So what we've seen, even after Title IX was amended in 1987 with the Civil Rights Review Act, Restoration Act, there is specifically an opportunity to again go back to the drawing board, to expand the definition of sex, to include gender identity. This is about, at bottom, the rule of law, the Constitution, and congressional authority. The Biden administration cannot, with a stroke of a pen, unilaterally redefine longstanding federal law without going through the appropriate process.
Thank you. And Ms. Gaines, your profound dedication to sports, including your tenure as a swimmer at Kentucky's women's teams, it speaks volumes. Given your extensive experience, do you fear that if the Biden administration redefines Title IX to encompass gender identity, that it might deprive young women of academic and athletic prospects that they rightfully deserve?
Of course. As we've seen, again, at least the past year and a half since I've really started noticing this issue after I was directly impacted by it, we're seeing this as a trend, and it's an exponential trend, and again, only going one way, and that is adversely affecting women. So I believe if the Biden administration pursues this rewrite and equates sex with gender identity, this would most certainly negatively harm women.
And as per the Washington Post, women's sports have seen an incredible surge, growing over 1,000% in the last 50 years. And as many have said, 3 million participants in 2022. Do you share the concerns that allowing biological men to dominate women's sports might discourage women and girls from pursuing athletics K through 12 and in higher education?
Absolutely. And it's not only necessarily the domination aspect. It is the safety aspect. It is the fear of speaking out. It is the locker room aspect. Those are all contributors to ultimately discouraging women from playing sports. And I want to say, too, it's not about domination. A male playing on a women's team, even if he places dead last, it's still taking a roster spot. It's still taking an opportunity away from a deserving woman. So it's not all about domination. But yes, I certainly believe this issue does discourage women from playing sports.
Thank you. This intrusion threatens to undermine hard-fought progress and to deter future generations from embracing the opportunities sports offer. And with my remaining time, I want to turn back to you, Ms. Perry. What more can Congress do to ensure that the Biden administration is not able to radically alter Title IX?
A couple of things. First, if this rule is published, this chamber has 60 days to be able to vote on a Congressional Review Act challenge and disapprove the law. I encourage the individuals who are forthright and brave with a courageous steeled spine to be able to do just that if for some reason a Congressional Review Act challenge fails and it goes through to the Federal Register. I'm quite certain there are a number of individual public interest law firms that are ready to file suit. And in the interim, this chamber, as well as the upper chamber, should consider passing legislation specifically to keep sex separated and distinct by biological sex.
Thank you. Many of us in this committee and across Congress were parents and were grandparents to young women who will directly bear the consequences of an administration that chooses to ignore a scientific reality, the clear and biological differences between men and women. We cannot stand by and allow radical policies to trample on common sense. And I'm proud to yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a point of order.
The subcommittee will suspend.
Sorry, she will have to state the point.
No.
I identify with my pronouns as state and states, and thus I move to strike deplorable states from the record.
The committee will suspend. The point of order is not timely due to intervening debate occurring after the words were said. Point of order is overruled.
Thank you. Ms. Gaines, are you familiar with the name Caitlyn Jenner?
I am.
Can you tell me real quick, because we are on time here, who Caitlyn Jenner is?
Yes, Caitlyn Jenner is formerly Bruce Jenner, who, of course, was and still is one of the world's most renowned and accomplished athletes, competing in the men's decathlon, winning gold medals and world records. But now, of course, has transitioned, identifies as Caitlyn Jenner, and is not competing in sports anymore, competitively.
Are you aware that Caitlyn Jenner has come out against men competing in women's sports?
I am.
Why do you think Caitlyn Jenner did that?
Given the fact that he's an athlete himself, was an athlete, I believe he understands the differences between men and women. And given the fact that he has also transitioned, I believe he understands the struggles that come with gender dysphoria and what that looks like, has weighed the differences between the two, and still sees a fundamental unfairness about allowing men into women's sports.
As a member of Congress, we're in charge of putting together the guidelines for our offices, specifically referencing sexual harassment. Would you consider exposing genitalia to someone who does not want to see that as sexual harassment?
I certainly would.
Do you feel that you've been sexually harassed as a result of biological men competing and having to undress in front of you and other women in the locker room?
I do. Again, non-consensually being exploited in front of a fully naked and fully intact male, I believe that meets the definition of sexual harassment.
Have you ever been physically attacked by standing up for women's rights in sports?
I have.
Can you name the biological sexes of those that have attacked you?
They were men who were dressed as women.
Can you repeat that again?
They were males who were dressed as women.
So you were attacked by a man?
Yes.
Can you let me know whether or not law enforcement pressed charges?
There were no charges pressed. The university, actually, this was at San Francisco State University. The university, in the days following, actually that next day after this attack took place, where again I was held for ransom for 4 hours with the police actually being held for ransom in the same room with me. The university released a statement. It was Dr. Jamila Moore, who is the vice president of student affairs at San Francisco State University. She released an email to their entire student body saying she was so proud of their brave students for handling me in the manner that they did, applauded them, and then gave them counseling resources to help cope with my presence on their campus.
Do you think that there should be accountability for a man who hits a woman?
Absolutely.
Do you feel that you are personally being basically outed by even some members up here because of the fact that you're standing up for women's sports?
Yes. I believe being called transphobic for saying that women deserve privacy, that we deserve safety, that we deserve equal opportunities, we deserve to maintain our dignity. I believe that is certainly an attack on my character, for sure.
I would just like to clarify for the record, I do believe in a woman's right for self-defense. So, I mean, as someone who has personally applied for my concealed carry, I think that you should do the same because obviously you're being attacked. And I think that that would be a great second debate here with House oversight. But I think that that's something that you should consider doing, being that you've received threats because of what you're doing currently. So just for the record.
I'm way ahead of you.
Got it. I just want to close out by saying this. You know, up here, especially being a new mother, I find it very ironic that people that seemed that they would champion women's rights are now throwing someone like you under the bus. And I just want to say for the record, there's no such thing as a birthing person. It's called mother. There's no such thing as chest feeding. It's called breastfeeding. And finally, there's no such thing as equality for women if you're attempting to eliminate them from sports. Thank you, Ms. Gaines.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Sessions for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you for holding this hearing. I would like to, if I could, engage at least Ms. Perry and Mrs. Russell as coaches and people who've been in the sport for a huge number of years. You have recognized the NCAA and their authority over sports. As it conducts itself, what I believe is they've always tried to create fairness, whether it's betting, whether it's hundreds of rules and regulations about recruiting, things that they have rules on literally A to Z. I was an athlete. I don't remember if it's a D1 or D2 school, quite honestly, because if I called it D1, I think it used to be a D2 school. It's now a D1 school. But I was a D1 or 2 athlete and went through a number of rules and regulations and right and wrong and good and bad and how things work, and have been used to that as one of my sons is a recruited D1 athlete. And the NCAA has a lot of governance, and they always tend to know the answer, and they always tend to have a rule governing what I think is fairness, but also safety. This seems like to me that the NCAA, if they're the governing body over what occurs at NCAA meets or matches, should be very concerned about this. What do you believe, where do you believe they have failed to provide guidance and governance and safety in this issue? Either one of you, please.
I can say specifically that the NCAA has kicked the ball down the road, as it were. They have decided to leave leadership of the governing sports organizations to their own rules, developing whether or not individuals need, for example, testosterone suppression, or whether or not sports can be separated by biological sex. Unfortunately, the NCAA has a significant influence. Their membership, their ranking system is a sort of Damocles, where the other athletic organizations, the management managing bodies and the institutions that want to maintain their ranking, whether that's D1, D2, or D3. And so to fail to make a unified policy, maintaining sex-separated spaces, as the NCAA has recognized for years, it's ultimately made it harder for college administrators who are now faced with the Hobson's choice of, do we forego our ranking? Do we forego the revenue that comes with it? Or do we essentially toe what is coming from the federal government's party line that sex equals gender identity?
So you believe they're being led in this case by the federal government?
I think it is setting the tone for the entire nation.
Ms. Russell?
I would agree with Ms. Perry. The NCAA has passed the buck. I went on their website and looked at every single sport to see what each sport's policy was. Many of them were the 10 nanomoles of testosterone level. The ones that had the strictest rules against biological males were triathlon and water polo. So if you want your daughters to have the best chance to play, put them in triathlons and water polo. Otherwise, good luck.
Well, it seems to me that the NCAA has failed in its what I believe is overburdensome governance, that they failed in this. Ms. Gaines, you and I spoke last August in Colorado, and you were still very appropriately really shocked and surprised that this even happened without your notice, without your consent, without the coaches being aware, and you considered it to be an assault. I'm going to use those terms, that you were faced with a male in a locker room. And it is true that I think that there should have been some understanding that they were going to take advantage of you and the things that were of norm. Have you clarified or would you clarify your ideas now about how you felt with this?
Just as you said, I do believe it was an assault, and to sum it up in words here, of course, undressing next to a male who's also undressed, of course, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, but I believe the best words to describe this, of course, it's utter violation. It's betrayal by the people who were in place to protect us, at least supposed to protect us. And I believe the best word is traumatic, and not even necessarily traumatic because of what we were forced to see or, again, how we were forcibly exploited. It was traumatic to me and my teammates to know just how easy it was for those people in power who created these policies to totally dismiss our rights to privacy without even a second thought, without even bare minimum forewarning us.
I want to thank each of you for being here today. Madam Chairman, thank you very much. I'll yield back my time.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of Judiciary, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all our witnesses for being here as well. It seems to me there are sort of two problems here. There's the fundamental problem, which is, letting men compete against women in sports is just crazy. I love what Governor Huckabee Sanders said in response to the State of the Union. She said, the divide in America today is normal versus crazy. And this is one of those obvious divides. It is crazy to think it's okay to let guys compete against girls in sports. That is just a given. The whole country knows that. Anyone with common sense understands that. But I'm also more concerned, or maybe not more concerned, just as concerned with what happens if you speak out against it, which is exactly what happened to Miss Russell. Because Miss Russell, my understanding is you had you coached what? First you were a Division I athlete, is that right?
Yes, that's
Division I
correct.
lacrosse player, and then you coached for, I think, 20, if I read your thing, 27, 28 years you coached?
Yes.
So you're not just some rookie coming off the street. You've coached a long time. You've had all kinds of success, right? You won awards. I think you run the national program at some other, not in the United States, but somewhere I read in your thing. Where do you run the national program?
The U.S. Virgin Islands.
So you're an accomplished coach, but because you said what was normal, you got fired. Is that right?
Because I said what was normal, it was not liked.
Yeah.
And I was canceled.
I shouldn't say fired. Yeah, you were canceled because you weren't allowed to coach anymore. They moved you somewhere else. I read your testimony last night. They moved you somewhere else in the athletic department or in the university at Oberlin. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I always tell people, don't think they won't come after you. Because I don't think you're not some crazy right-wing conservative Republican, are you, Miss Russell? You're just a coach. In fact, you even used the term, what did you say? You're the hippie love coach? That's not exactly how you describe normally not how you describe Republicans. So this is your words. You've been nicknamed the hippie love coach. You work with all your student athletes, even I think you even said some who are transgender.
Yes, I've coached 3 transgender students. And in my support after I spoke out, I have had many gay men, many lesbians, and a group of transgender athletes and people who aren't athletes let me know that they support this. They support that women's sports should stay female only.
Yeah, and they were willing to confide in you because they trusted you. They knew you were a good coach. They knew you were there to help the student athlete. They understood that. They were willing to come, but that wasn't good enough. This is the part that is so frightening. It's never good enough for the left. It's always got to be every single thing they want, or we're coming after you. Even if you're the hippie love coach, they're coming after you. And that's what they did to you. I mean, this is how the left, this is how the cancel culture mob operates. It's a total attack. So this is bigger than, as bad as it is what Miss Gaines described, what she had to go through. Now, if I remember your story right, Miss Gaines, you won, but you weren't able to be number one because of this Leah Thomas individual. You actually won I mean, bad enough as that is, this attack on the First Amendment and your right to speak out against that is just as bad and just as scary, because that's across the board. And I tell people all the time, you have 5 liberties under the First Amendment. Your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, your right to petition the government, free press, free speech. The most important one, by far, is your right to talk. Because if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith. You can't share your faith. You can't petition your government. And you spoke out against something that anyone with any common sense knows is ridiculous, and they came after you. That's why this panel, and Chairman, thank you for doing this. This panel and this subject is so darn important because it's fundamental to who we are as a country. You can't have a country if you're only allowed to say what the left says is okay. And for people who stand up and defend that, they need to, Miss Goss Graves, I don't know. I wasn't able to be here for all of this, but my guess is you're defending this idea that guys can compete against girls. Maybe not. I didn't hear it, but don't think they won't come after you at some point too. I mean, here's how bad the left is. The left, Dianne Feinstein, liberal, iconic senator for the left, wasn't even good enough for the left. It was the Dianne Feinstein Elementary School in San Francisco. They went back and found something she said 30 years ago, and they said, we got to rename the school. So no one is safe. If they can go after Miss Russell, 27 years coaching for saying something that everybody knows is true, they can come after anybody. And that is a dangerous world to live in. I didn't mean to speak that long. I actually wanted to let you guys talk. Miss Gaines or Miss Perry, if you want to say something, go right ahead.
I think what we're seeing is sort of this philosophical devolution on truth. We've gone from an ontological perspective on truth. Truth is truth no matter how you feel, to a consequentialist approach on truth. Truth is truth so long as it doesn't hurt your feelings. The law doesn't care about feelings. The law is the law so that we have a method of American constitutional governance. And Title IX and the Constitution are very cut and dry. It doesn't matter whose feelings are hurt. And if there are indeed less than 1% of individuals in the country who are transgender, as Representative Garcia mentioned, why the urgency from the Biden Department of Education to suddenly upend 50 years of civil rights protections for biological women who benefit from Title IX? That is throwing the entire canon of civil rights law on its head.